In a neighborhood near the outskirts of the Ecuadorian capital, Freddie and Carmen are walking back from their home. Their house is modest and they share the space with other members of their family. The couple make a combined income of about $500 per month, which is just enough to get by. For the past few days, however, the two haven't been working. Instead, they were participating in an indigenous movement that was calling on the Ecuadorian government to abandon austerity measures that threatened to increase their cost of living. A movement that was ultimately successful.
Finally, the voice of indigenous people is being valued. Finally, the government has listened. If they hadn't, we would have continued to go after the corrupt government that only puts money in their pocket.
There are thousands of people from indigenous communities from across Ecuador who, like Freddie and Carmen, flooded the streets of Quito for more than a week. The protests were against a proposed cut to a fuel subsidies program that's been in place for decades. Analysts like ADORACION GUAMAN say this policy would have had a devastating impact on the poor.
You would be sentencing people to poverty or sending entire swaths of the Ecuadorian population into poverty. There are many people who live off a subsistence economy where $1 means the difference between a decent meal or not eating.
For low-income families, like Freddie and Carmen's, avoiding the increase in fuel prices is being viewed as a win, but Carmen says the fight is far from over.
We
say that this is only the beginning, until all of the corrupt leaders leave. This doesn't end here. The fight continues until all the corruption is gone.
On Monday, indigenous leaders cheered the victory over the government, but reiterated their demand that fuel prices be reduced to earlier levels.
This is the scene in downtown Quito with hundreds of demonstrators no longer protesting in the streets, arriving at this auditorium for one last address from indigenous leaders, one last celebration before they go home now that a calm has returned to the streets of the Ecuadorian capital.
The agreement between the Ecuadorian government and indigenous demonstrators means the unrest in the country has ended. The government is now faced with a new pressure to establish economic reforms that are more inclusive or otherwise face a backlash from a sector of society that has lost confidence in the country's leadership. Manuel Rapalo, Aljazeera, Quito, Ecuador.